Time to talk about Napoleon. And no, not Napoleon Dynamite. Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, there's a school of historical thought. I know some people who reside there um, who believe that we are simply adrift on a sea of impersonal forces that push us wherever it is we go. And I have two words for that. And no, not those two, these two. Napoleon Bonaparte. This is a guy who wasn't adrift on the waves of history, being pushed around by personal forces. He became that force. Napoleon Bonaparte. He is the one who makes history. Of course, other people you can throw in that argument, Genghis Khan, that Alexander the Great guy, Shaka Zulu, maybe even George Washington. Yeah, people like this come out and they become history. And Napoleon Bonaparte takes a France that is in complete anarchy, total chaos, falling apart, welds it together, and decides he had nothing else better to do, so he's going to go off and conquer Europe. He did, after all, go to a military school, so, might as well put that training to use, right? Now, the French government, we got a revolving door, man. They are constantly hiring over there. The Bourbon monarchy has been involved in some way, shape, or form, even as minor nobility, as far back as the 1200s. In 1661, with your friend Louis XIV there on top of the throne, and it becomes an absolute monarchy in an absolute sense of the word. Louis XIV, 15, and 16. In 1791, we have a constitutional monarchy as the French Revolution explodes into the world in 1789. It's still somewhat orderly. And in 1792, they get rid of the constitutional monarchy and proclaim a republic. Louis XVI tries to make a run for it. Ain't going to happen. Gets his head chopped off. Why? Because the Republic is complete with a Committee for Public Safety. KGB, secret police, anybody? That one's being run by Robespierre, who's chopping off heads left and right until everyone gets tired of him and they chop his head off in 1794. So, guess it was a pretty good run. Of course, the whole Republic lasts until 1795. They scrapped that. And now we have the Directory from 1795 to 1799. In other words, 5 people are running the country, kind of like ICM boardroom sort of thing, the Directory, right? Now, a guy who is rising up in the ranks and becoming more and more popular through military victories, i.e., see Julius Caesar, is a guy named Napoleon Bonaparte. He's been fighting against everybody because France is fighting everybody, the British, the Prussians, the Austrians, and he's doing most of his battles down in Italy, and he's winning big. And he's becoming very popular, and people are trying to keep him kind of away from the government because they're afraid he's going to pull a Julius Caesar, come back and overthrow the government, which is exactly what he's going to do in 1799. He overthrows the Directory, and we establish the consulates. 1799 to 1804. And guess who's first consul? Yeah, our friend Napoleon. He's trying to make it look like it's some sort of a republic. There is a constitution, there are written rules of government, and he decides to drop the whole charade in 1804 and call it the French Empire. He crowns himself Emperor of the French, not King of France, Emperor of the French. They still don't want to mess with this monarchy kind of stuff, right? But he's going to be out there conquering stuff left and right, and he's doing it for France. I'm sure he wants some personal glory in there too, and it must have worked because we're actually talking about him. All right, here's Napoleon does a really good job, as you can tell by looking at the map. And you're going to want to take a picture of this map because we're going to be referring back to this thing. So take a picture, sketch it, memorize it, do what it is you got to do. Man, look at France. He is going to do a really good job. Search you about Napoleon. Hey, you pay your French taxes. This guy's all in. Napoleon, living in the moment. Look what you can do when you're not hooked onto your cell phone all day. Now, remember the Holy Roman Empire thing? Yeah, he finally puts that out of the misery and declares it to be the Confederation of the Rhine. Now, remember, France is fighting the British. They're fighting the Spanish. They're fighting Austria. They're fighting Prussia. They're fighting the Austrians down in Italy. They're fighting Austria and Prussia in Germany. The British are mixed up kind of all over the place. So Napoleon goes across the Rhine, And the old Holy Roman Empire, which exists kind of in name only, he just finally puts that thing out of its misery and reorganized as Confederation of the Rhine. This is an allied nation, he's already created a French empire, he's created a whole nother nation here. And it's created as a buffer zone against the Austrians and the Prussians. Or, in the way Napoleon thinks, is a launch pad against the Austrians and the Prussians. Well, in 1802, there's peace briefly, the Peace of Ames. So there's like a 8-month peace here between France and everybody. France and Britain, these are the two heavyweights going after each other because they don't like each other too much. And the French are still in the German state of Hanover, which, of course, is supposed to belong to Great Britain because they have a personal union with the monarchy over there. So in 1802, they have a peace treaty. In 1803, they're back at war with the British and everybody else. Kind of like halftime at the Super Bowl, I guess. In 1805, the French and Spanish fleet is destroyed at Trafalgar there by Admiral Nelson. So that precludes any kind of an invasion of Great Britain. They can't really walk on water. But that same year, Napoleon has a fantastic, a huge victory at Austerlitz, defeating the Russians and Austrians at the same time. Down goes Austria, and Russia decides they're going to have enough of this, and they just back away for a while. 1807, they're still fighting as late as that. But Russia signs a peace treaty with French. Austria is basically under French control. In 1806, the Battle of Jena. Yeah, Prussia's got a good army, but they're going up against Napoleon, man. Napoleon wins, Prussia's defeated. Look at this. They're just spreading their way across Europe. They've beaten Austria. They've beaten Prussia. They've got most of Italy under their control. Germany's under control. They take over the Netherlands. I mean, this guy's a juggernaut. You can't stop him. The only one they can't seem to get a shot at's the British. But even Britain's like, at least they can't come across the channel after us. So even Britain's having some trouble with this guy. The more I think about it, sounds like the New England Patriots, doesn't it? Alrighty, blockade times. Well, since Napoleon can't really invade Great Britain, he has what he declares the continental system. Nobody in French-controlled Europe, which is basically all of Europe, is allowed to trade with the British. He's going to strangle their economy and bring them to the bargaining table. The British issue the orders in council. They're going to blockade French Europe. Now, here's the problem. France's navy is smaller than the Royal Navy. They can't really blockade Britain. They can scream and yell, but they can't really do it. Britain can blockade France, but it's kind of hard to blockade all of Europe. So the only people that really get hurt in this are the Americans. This impacts American history because we try to trade with the French and the British jump our ships. We try to trade with the British. The French get a ship here and there. We got mad and shot at them for a while, but the British are the worst offenders and they're trying to take over our own economy, even though we're a free country, and this will lead to the War of 1812. Didn't really bother the British that much, kind of an annoyance because France is the real enemy. So France cannot blockade Britain. Royal Navy can blockade France, but like I said, they got the rest of Europe to draw supplies from. Now, other countries will be hurt by this stuff. Portugal is one of them. They decide they're not listening to France's continental system. Why? They're very far from France. They got to, the French have to cross Spain to even get there. Portugal and Spain have been friends for a long time, so they're going to keep trading with the British. Napoleon decides he has to invade Portugal, but to get there, he has to cross Spain, and they sign the Treaty of Fontainebleau, which really upsets the people of Spain because now you're allowing French soldiers to come through, 120,000 of them, and it makes it look like, that you've just turned into a French puppet. So they revolt in 1808, the Mutiny of Arigens. Things get really crazy when Napoleon calls in Charles IV, King of Spain, and Ferdinand VII, it's his son, and he forces them both to abdicate the throne. And who do they give it to? That's right, we give the throne of Spain to Napoleon Bonaparte's unemployed brother, Joseph Napoleon. Great, now we've got a new monarchy in Spain, and it's not even Spanish. Hence the revolt. And now Spain turns into one big loony bin. So the French wanted to cross to attack Portugal. Now they got to fight their way across Spain before they get anywhere near Portugal. And now the British show up in Portugal and Spain to fight the French. So instead of crossing Spain to fight Portugal, they're fighting in Spain, they're fighting Portugal, and now the British have shown up. Napoleon calls this the Spanish ulcer because he never got a handle on Spain. As we said, they're fighting Portugal, Spain, and Britain over there in the peninsula, in the Iberian Peninsula, hence the Peninsular War. And it's very funny if Spain and Britain can't stand each other. But when Napoleon takes the country over, suddenly they're getting along with each other, right? Sweden decides now they're not going to join the continental system because if the French are going to be tied up in Spain, there's really not a lot you can do to get to Sweden. Plus, they got to cross the Baltic Sea. Well, they get attacked by French allies Denmark and Russia. Denmark's not a big problem. Russia is. Meanwhile, the Battle of Copenhagen, the British fleet shows up, Nelson again, and destroys the Danish and French fleet. So no invasion coming that way. Russia is going to take Finland away from the Swedes, though. Hey, every time you see a naval uniform and you see that those three stripes they have on that back thing, it stands for it's actually we borrowed that in the British. And those three lines, they signify the three great battles that Nelson won in the Napoleonic Wars. Yeah, Copenhagen, Trafalgar, I'm sorry, and of course the Nile. Just thought you should know that. Well, let's see. Portugal's escaping the continental system, they got to fight their way out of it. Sweden's getting out of this thing, though they did lose Finland to the Russians. And in 1810, Russia, supposedly France's ally, decide they're getting out of the continental system. And off we go. Napoleon says, I have to invade Russia. Now, all this fighting and everything, you got to take some time off every now and again. So here's Napoleon's personal life. The lady rather, the lady he was married to and the love of his life was Josephine. He really did love her. This was clearly soulmate sort of thing. But the problem is once you become the emperor of France or king of whatever, you need a male heir, and I don't know, just like your friend Henry VIII, he's not putting the goal in the net. So he's not putting the puck in the net. So it's not happening. So he has to actually divorce her against his and her will, and he marries an Austrian princess named Marie Louise. Yeah. Now let's see. You've got a French monarchy kind of thing. You married an Austrian princess. It sounds like Louis XVI all over again. But nonetheless, she's considerably younger, and they do have a son who's going to be Napoleon II. He's never going to get the throne, though, because you know how this is going to turn out. He dies in 1831, by the way. So even Napoleon's got a personal life going on over here. He's got to start. He's trying to think about the future. And right now, the future is getting really murky there with the Peninsula War, and I got to figure out what to do with Russia. So he decides to invade Russia. 22nd day of June, 1812, he invades Russia. 22nd day of June, 1941, Hitler invaded Russia too. Same day. Hey, same result. How do I know it's June 22nd? It's my wife's birthday. Yep, got no choice on that one. Nonetheless, Napoleon invades Russia, and we know how this is going to go. He actually is succeeding. He's winning battles, Borodino and Smolensk and all these places. And he actually marches into Moscow. He takes Moscow from the Russians, and the Russians burn it down around him because it was getting very late in the year. By the time he started in June, by the time he got to Moscow, it's already October. He's in there, the snow's coming down, everything's happening, so they figured it was hiding the buildings for the winter. Nope, they burned Moscow down around him, right? So they have to march their way back to France in this horrible weather, and guess who's over there taking shots at him every step of the way? You got it, the Russians. They're used to this weather. Why? They live there. Because, it's Russia. This is going to completely destroy Napoleon's army, the Grand Army, over 500,000 soldiers, and this thing just gets chewed up to pieces, and very few of them are going to stagger home, and some of them deserted and got away, but as an effective force, this thing is destroyed, and Napoleon's army will never be the same. So everything's starting to collapse after the invasion of Russia in 1812. They had the huge defeat in Russia. The Peninsular War is still raging on. He keeps winning, but he can't deliver a knockout blow in Spain. He took a swing at the Russians, and the Russians hit him back pretty hard. So in 1813, suddenly Prussia breaks loose out of French control, especially when half the army got destroyed in Russia. And now Britain, Prussia, and Russia declare war on France. Austria hangs back because, Marie Louise is there. But sooner or later they're going to join in too. And it's a long, brutal story, Battle of Leipzig and the Battle of the Nations and everything. But they're actually going to push Napoleon all the way back. And you have the Battle of Paris and the outskirts of Paris. And Napoleon is finally defeated. In April of 1814, he surrenders, and they send him to the island of Elba down in the Mediterranean. Now, remember, Napoleon isn't even French. He's actually Corsican, but turned out to be a really big French nationalist. They let him rule the island of Elba. Some people think it was an insult. Some people think it was, what else is this guy going to do? Give him something to do. Off he goes. Now, what they do in France? Well, remember, they want to put a monarch back on the throne, and that's what they do. It's Louis the 18th. Louis the 17th never had a chance to rule there. So Louis the 18th gets put on the throne of France, and the people of France are not happy about it. Napoleon senses an opportunity, sets sail from Elba, lands in Marseilles. The French army is sent to stop him. He opens his shirt and yells, "Will you shoot your former generals?" They said no. They join him, and here we go again, man. Just when you thought it was over, Napoleon's back. They call it the 100 Days. Actually, it was 94, but hey, who's counting? Well, he's eventually going to lose at Waterloo to the Duke of Wellington of Great Britain and Marshal Blucher from Prussia in June of 1815. This time they send him into the middle of nowhere island called St. Helena, out in the middle of the South Atlantic. He's going to die there in 1821. Say what you will about Napoleon, no one is ever going to forget this guy. There's somebody worse showing up in the 20th century, but nonetheless, Napoleon is somebody no one's going to forget. You say that name and boom, people know who you're talking about. So I saying Alexander the Great or Tom Brady. Now, Russia, Prussia, and Austria signed the Holy Alliance after they finally defeated Napoleon. This is to make sure that Europe is not infected by this crazy democracy stuff and revolution and secularism. They're going to make sure this doesn't happen. Any place that looks like they're going to be a revolution, Russia, Prussia, and Austria are going to come down on it in full force. Later on, this evolves into what we call the Concert of Europe. All of the great powers, Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Great Britain joins. They get together to make sure there is never another general war in Europe again. They're going to make sure that there is a balance of power. And anything that looks like democracy or revolution, they're going to come down on it like a ton of bricks. In other words, they are trying to stop the clock. Okay, but we know that's not going to happen. All right, it's going to go forward whether you like it or not. So you might as well get ahead of the curve. But nonetheless, the concert of Europe, Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria are going to try to prevent a general war in Europe and make sure its democracy stuff doesn't get out of hands. And it's going to be called the Vienna system. But most people like concert of Europe. In 1818, France is considered rehabilitated. And of course, it's a monarchy. So now they're allowed into the club. And as a matter of fact, there's a revolution in Spain in 1818, and they send the French to go put it down. The French do it. Hey, they get to stay in the club. So that's what Napoleon was doing. And if they thought the whole thing about revolutions was over, forget it. There's a lot more coming because once history starts rolling forward, you can either roll with it or get crushed by the wheels. Have a great day.